Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video, despite Starmer performing very well in PMQs yesterday, I'm going to have to discuss one question which he absolutely mangled the response to. Was, of course, regarding the catastrophe playing out in Gaza, and was the worst response I think I've heard him give to a question about the situation, and there have been some bad ones. But the worst part, arguably, is that the response does not even mean what people will inevitably take it to mean. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So let's go over the main points of the question and answer and then break both of them down. So Ayub Khan, one of the so-called Gaza MPs, asked a question about the definition of genocide in connection with Gaza, asked Starmer if he had a different definition of genocide, and then asked what we were doing to save the lives of desperate Palestinians, given that the UK holds the presidency of the UN Security Council, which means nothing, by the way. Starmer responded by saying it would be wise to start any question like that with reference to what happened in October last year. And he was well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why, in his words, I have never described this or referred to it as genocide. Now let's look at the answer first, because it's shocking, but not for the reasons some think. First of all, what would you understand by this statement? And I'll quote exactly his words, just so we're clear. I am well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I have never described this or referred to it as genocide. Because I think most people would reasonably, I don't just mean people who want to have a particular worldview, I think most reasonable people would think Starmer was saying there is no genocide occurring in Palestine in his opinion, at least not in the legal sense. But that is not what the statement meant. Now, how do I know? That's an ambiguous statement. How do I know? Can I see into his mind? No, I can't. But David Lammy made the government's position clear not long ago. Indeed, Khan referenced David Lammy in his question, which was one of the three lies he actually told whilst asking the question, but I'll cover those in a bit. He suggested that Lammy had said there was no genocide in Palestine. Now, David Lammy has given a statement to the House of Commons on the government's position regarding genocide just generally around the world, because there are other accusations of genocide going on as well that a lot of people who are concerned about Palestine seem to ignore. What Lammy actually said to the Commons, and I'll quote, "It must always rightfully be a matter for the International Criminal Court and others to make a determination of genocide, not for national government." Which, first of all, I'm going to say is fair, because put it to a lower level, we would not expect MPs to pronounce someone guilty of murder while an investigation or trial is ongoing, because that's not justice, and it could prejudice the case. So you actually make it more likely that a guilty person walks free because you've prejudiced the case. So surely it's just as important, if not more so, when you're talking about way more serious crimes. But the main point is that the government's position is it is not going to determine whether or not a genocide is happening anywhere in the world, including Palestine, unless or until a relevant court says so one way or the other. So if anyone reads into any statement, any ambiguous statement from Lammy or Starmer or any other minister that they are pronouncing judgment, they are misinterpreting that statement. However, we cannot expect people to follow government statements closely enough to be able to cross-reference like that. If Starmer gives an ambiguous statement that can be reasonably interpreted as a judgment that a genocide is not being committed, that is entirely his own fault. And such a crass statement can cause real damage. It can cause damage to community cohesion, because both Jewish and Muslim communities have been attacked. Attacks have increased, indeed, since last October, as well as damaged Labour's election chances, because let's face facts, things are not going to get any better for the Palestinians in the near future. And the maddening thing is that what Labour are doing in practice is everything they can be expected to do, because we have no skin in the game, really. They are supporting the ICC. I'll pick this up in a moment. The Biden administration actually tried to threaten Labour over this. We had to stand up to Biden in order to maintain explicit support for the ICC on the matter. Things are going to get way more intense with Trump in the White House. Things could get much messier. We've reinstated funding to UNRWA, which was blocked for much longer than should have been the case. We've blocked export licenses for military equipment where there is a credible risk that the IDF are using them or could be using them in Gaza. Now, some are claiming that this isn't the case, that they've left off the export block, for example, F-16 parts. This is not true. The government statement confirms that these two have been blocked, and Lammy confirmed it explicitly in the House of Commons when asked as well. In fact, even pro-Palestinian voices can't actually, I mean, like the big ones, can't actually call for the government to do any more than they are already doing without lying. See, some keep pushing the lie that we are still exporting, weapons to Israel that could be used there. Some of them are even explicitly saying about the F-16 parts. We're not. None of this is true. You ask people what they expect the government to do that are practical, and all they can come up with things are that we're already doing. So this is a political mess which is basically self-inflicted. So how should Starmer have responded? Well, let's look at the general options to any sort of question like this. The government could say that the evidence points to genocide, or at least crimes against humanity. I don't actually know why everyone gets hung up on one specific criminal offence when it seems to me that there are lots at play here. They could suggest the evidence points away from it, or they could dodge the question altogether. So consequences for each one. Obviously, they shouldn't suggest that the evidence points away from it being genocide, because there's a bloody good chance it is genocide. In fact, to be honest, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. Keir Starmer, actually, ironically, of all the MPs in the House, is the only one who has a decent chance of being able to judge it. But if it's not genocide, I don't really know what is. And that is why Starmer giving a response which could be interpreted as that is a stupid thing to do. So what about suggesting that maybe the evidence does point to genocide? Well, you're not strictly undermining the ICC in saying so, because the fact that they're even investigating suggests there's clearly evidence. It's obvious that we're not really exerting diplomatic pressure on Israel. There was a case a year ago where we could say what we're trying to do is do what we can, exert diplomatic pressure to make sure that aid gets to Palestinians. But let's be honest, whatever diplomatic pressure we are applying isn't working. We are not even able to get aid in, much less prevent the targeting of civilians. So given that we don't seem to be influencing things for any good, why not just make a stand on principle, as some countries have? Because although we can't do any good for Palestinians, we can certainly harm ourselves. Never mind Trump, any US government would go ballistic at us for responding in such a way. But Trump is a madman. This raises the stakes much further. And given that not a single Palestinian life will be saved if we, make that statement any more than it was when we started explicitly calling for a ceasefire, it would be insane to argue that we adopt a position that just makes us feel better but causes real life economic harm to this country, which makes people in poverty and suffering in the UK their lives even worse. So the response is to dodge then. And what infuriates me is it was very easy to dodge and there were options. First of all, Starmer could have actually ignored the first part of the question and focused on the main part about providing aid, because that's more important anyway. The government have attacked Israel yet again this week for not allowing aid in. MPs heard from a doctor in Gaza about the heartbreaking scenes he'd experienced operating on children and others with no proper medical facilities. So the government can make explicit, open, public statements criticising the Israeli government for blocking aid. So he could have just responded by saying, well, they're doing everything we can and it is unacceptable for the Israeli government to be blocking efforts. Could have said that, job done, question evaded. Actually, the end part of the question answered, the rest of it evaded. But he had other options as well. Khan told a few lies in his question. He said that Lammy had suggested it wasn't genocide because not enough people had been killed. Now, I do get how, again, people could have interpreted that. Again, clumsy wording. But also, he said that Article 2 explicit of the UN definition of genocide explicitly states that genocide is not about numbers but entirely about intent. Untrue. Not true at all. And you could look it up yourself. It's really easy. Now, it is true, as I say, that Lammy and Starmer are giving responses that open themselves up to these interpretations, and that is their fault. It's not anyone else's fault. But Article 2 does not say it's about numbers, explicitly or otherwise. In fact, implicitly, it is about numbers, if you read it. Not that I think numbers are the issue here, because remember, the ICC are considering a case against Hamas as well as the Israeli government, right? And, if it is even credible for a prosecutor to push charge of genocide against Hamas, then of course there has to be evidence against Israel, just purely in terms of numbers, because Israel have killed way more Palestinians than Hamas have Israelis. But Khan still lied in what Article 2 states, so Starmer could have used that. He could have said that as a human rights lawyer who's actually prosecuted people for genocide, a bit of an expert, you know, he knows what Article 2 states, and that the honourable gentleman is completely wrong in what he characterises as it, and that it is the government's position to support the ICC and other international courts in determining whether a genocide has or not been carried out anywhere in the world, that it is not for politicians to pronounce judgment and undermine the work of international courts. That would have dealt with the question, and by using simple statements that the government has already publicly made, no need for ambiguity, it would change nothing about the government's position. Instead, what we got was a response where it was ambiguous, but the obvious interpretation to any reasonable person is that Starmer seems to be dismissing the idea of genocide, which is now going to be shared with people who will feel that Labour are not only not representing them, but somehow representing the bad guys, yeah? And although that alone will not usher the Tories back in, who will, by the way, not support the ICC, who would remove the block on exports of weapons to Israel, and who would not put serious efforts into getting aid into Gaza. Not that it makes any difference if we can't do that anyway. But it does shift the dial that way. It's like that interview with Muslim voters in Michigan who said they were voting for Trump because he was going to bring peace to Palestine. He'd said so. Yeah, like he did in Afghanistan and how he intends in Ukraine by letting the aggressors win. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.